All right, we good?
Yes, we are.
All right, good. Hey, welcome everybody. Good to see some familiar faces here. Good to see some new faces as well. I have the pleasure today of introducing not only a member, but also a friend of mine, Dr. Fred Blum. And today he's going to talk a little bit about giving you some framework to help you operate at the top of your game. He's going to teach us how to step out of problem solving and become a creator. Now, I understand that for some of us who are maybe mid or later career, being a creator may not be at the foremost of your mind, but if you could return to wherever your work is with new eyes on the job, eyes of a creator versus a problem solver, meaning you can take a more proactive approach to working with your teams and your departments in which you serve, helping you unleash your inner creator, which is going to bring some positive results, actually making problem solving simply a part of your overall process of creation. And with that in mind, I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to my good friend, Dr. Fred.
Thank you, Charles. That was a beautiful introduction. I want to change my view so I can, there you go, to gallery so I can see you guys. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. So was just discussing with Daniel prior to starting this talk. If you guys have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And Dan, you just at some point just kind of hit me up, let me know if there's questions piling up or something like that, and we'll try and get to everybody's questions or comments, whatever it may be. I have an intention for today's presentation, and essentially it's that you guys really begin to create new eyes and how you see this idea of problem solving versus creation, and hopefully create some space in your life to approach it a little bit differently. Now, before we get into the content, I want to give you guys just a little bit of sort of like a possibility of how you can get the most out of this presentation. And honestly, if you get nothing else from what I say today except this part, it'll be worth it. And that has to do with listening, the difference between listening from what I call intellect versus listening for insight. So listening from insight, listening from intellect or listening for insight. So when you're listening from your intellect, which is how most of us have been trained to listen. It's how we learned to listen in school when we were going through all this, taking tests and all that kind of stuff, where we just have to kind of regurgitate information. It's basically collecting data. I call it adding more facts to the pile of facts in your head. It's listening from what you already know, your preconceived notions. So one of the keys, one of the big challenges with listening from intellect is when we hear something that we don't agree with or doesn't seem familiar to us, we tend to shut down. Very rare is the person who can hear something that they don't agree with and keep their mind open and keep listening. So when somebody is listening from intellect, I can tell because they're kind of doing this, It's like they're checking boxes as to what they already know. So I'm going to invite you to try something a little bit different today. When you're listening for insight, you're putting your preconceived ideas away and you're just kind of receiving what's being offered. It's a little bit like listening to a young child. If you're listening to a 5-year-old and they're telling you how they built a sandcastle or they flew a spaceship to the moon, you're not like listening for the accuracy of what they're saying. You're just probably keeping your heart open and just receiving them. So I'm going to invite you to listen to me today like I was 5. Not so much in the awe, isn't he cute kind of way, although that might be fun too, but more in the sort of open-hearted, what can I learn here kind of way. Okay, so if we agree with that, that would be awesome. And with that, I just want to start. I looked up some statistics, just to sort of give you some background on what we're going to talk about today. And it turns out that about 62% of work-related stress and overwhelm is tied to trying to solve complex problems in your job. So whether you're the business owner or an employee, when you're trying to solve problems constantly, complex problems, and you're in that problem-solving mode, which we'll define a lot more clearly today, it tends to create a lot of stress for people. You know, that stress related to inadequate resources for problem solving is in fact a leading contributor to mental health challenges. And that if you're an executive or you're a small business owner yourself, you're actually 2 to 3 times more likely to experience high levels of stress compared to your employees, okay? Also, I found out that 85% of executives believe that their organization's ability to effectively solve complex problems, both within and for the customers they solve, is a major factor in determining their future success. So my premise for today is that we've been going about this all wrong. That the core of what I call the problem-solving approach often creates more problems and generally increased tension for you and your employees in your organization. Problem solving comes from a fundamental perspective. It's asking what's wrong. So that's the nature of what I call the problem-solving structure. It focuses on, surprise, problems. And when you focus on problems, you tend to end up with a life full of problems. Now, the creative structure comes from a very different perspective. We begin from the perspective, we're basically asking the question, given these circumstances, whatever they may be, what do I choose to create? So really let that kind of just resonate for a moment. Given these circumstances, it could be in your personal life, in your professional life, in your health, with your family, given whatever's happening in this moment, what do I choose to create? Now, note the difference between the feeling. I like to work a lot with the body, like how we experience things in our body. Note the way it feels between the experience of what's wrong, what problem do I have to solve, how does that feel inside, versus what do I choose to create? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and sort of my journey to moving from a problem solver to a creator. So the truth is, I've spent most of my life unknowingly mired in this problem-solving approach. And I mean, I really went after it. You know, I mean, I've been studying martial arts for 45 years or something. I got my first black belt when I was like 19. Along the way, I got degrees in psychology and chiropractic. I studied NLP and positive psychology and energy medicine and dozens of different spiritual traditions. I read hundreds of books, spent thousands of hours training, got married, built successful practices, had a beautiful son. And on the outside, I'm sure that it looked like I was doing pretty well. So why was it that I was waking up still every morning, like in those quiet moments when I had no distractions, wondering what the hell was wrong with me? You know, like, why was I still feeling like somehow I had to be in competition with my twin brother? It was like this endless parade of not ever feeling like I was going to ever be quite enough. And it turns out, as I began to really explore this more deeply, that I was actually looking in the wrong direction, because all that time, all that energy, all that money went into feeding a part of me that could never really be truly satisfied, that could never, in fact, be truly happy. What if, in other words, I was really chasing the idea of happiness that was taught to me, and one that I never really took the time to question? And so I'm willing to bet, quite honestly, that many of the people on this call are experiencing some version of the same thing. Now, how do I know this? Because we've mostly been taught the exact same lie. Right? You guys all know the drill. You work your ass off day after day, and when you're not working, you're studying, you're learning, you're going to classes like this, trying to figure out what we need to fix so that we can finally get what we want, so that we can finally be happy. So I've got bad news and good news, okay? The bad news is that plan doesn't work, at least not for very long. I mean, if it did, by now, I think we'd probably all be happy and rich and good looking. So that plan has limited success. Now, the good news is there is another way. I've discovered for myself that you can create success in the world from a place of peace and happiness, rather than trying to find happiness in the world, in the outcomes you create. You can start from that place of peace and happiness. And that, my friends, is the essence of the creative structure. You see, the assumption in problem solving is that peace and happiness is something that you get only after you've solved enough problems. Does that make sense? Does that sort of resonate for some of you guys? So think about that for a moment, okay? What is your version of life will be better when X happens? What is X for you? That's the essence of a problem-solving orientation. Everything in life becomes a problem that needs to be solved. And when we're operating from this structure, this problem-solving structure, we dramatically limit possibilities for ourselves for reasons which will become clear shortly. So I'm going to use a term here that most of you guys are probably familiar with, but I'm going to use it in a slightly different way, the term ego. Okay, so I'm not using it in the Sigmund Freud sense, although we did just find out a few moments ago that it's Carl Jung's birthday today. So happy birthday, Carl. But I'm going to use ego in a much simpler way. I'm just going to say ego is the identity that we create around the age of 2 out of fear and insecurity. So nobody creates an ego out of love and happiness. We create an ego because we find ourselves in a world that doesn't make sense to us, that we don't understand. We're still so pure, so innocent, and the world doesn't seem to match that, to give us back that experience. And so we create this identity sort of as a buffer between us and the world. And I have a whole ego origin story that I like to tell, but I'm not going to get into that now. Okay, so understand the primary purpose of your ego is survival, not happiness. So all this stuff about problem solving makes perfect sense to the ego. Now, the alternative to the ego is what I call the true self. So the alternative to living from the limited perspective of the ego is to wake up to who you really are. And we can use lots of different words. Just like for ego, we can use ego or identity or false self or personality. When we talk about true self, we can use different words too. I like the term superconscious or true nature. We can even use words like being or consciousness. And what we're really talking about, if we're being honest about it, when I talk about the true self, I'm talking about the spiritual nature of life behind the ego. The part of you that is infinite and eternal. Now, I'm not offering this in a religious perspective, but I've found that I've shared this kind of stuff with people from any imaginable religion, and it doesn't seem to contradict anybody else's spiritual beliefs. So you can still be a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, and everything I say should still make perfect sense, okay? Now, the nature of your true self is already peace, love, clarity, freedom, authenticity. In other words, everything that we think that we'll get when we achieve X or we solve enough problems is already built in. It's intrinsic to who you really are. I like to say that it's part of your factory settings. So your true self has direct access to infinite wisdom and infinite creativity. And we can actually use that to, in essence, recode the limiting beliefs, the limiting perspective of the ego. And we'll get more into that in a little bit as well. Okay, and this is the good news that I was talking about. In essence, what I'm saying is that we have the opportunity in this moment, without needing to change or fix one more thing about our lives, to be peaceful, happy, and free. So in summary, in my own life's journey, what I learned is that my true self is the source of peace and clarity, and that it's completely independent of my circumstances. I also learned that my ego or false self is what prevents me from seeing my true self or who I really am. I learned that from the perspective of my true self, I can begin with happiness rather than seeking it in some perfect circumstance in the world. And I learned that happiness, peace, and clarity is, in fact, the perfect foundation for creating a life that I love. And I think that's true for all of you guys as well. So these days, I wake up happy. And I've learned, and I've somehow managed to create a business where I help business owners and executives and even a world-famous NFL superstar create peace and clarity and freedom in their own lives while still creating kick-ass results in the world. So let's get a little more into problem solving versus creation. So problem solving, as you can probably guess now, comes from the ego, because the ego, again, was created to solve a problem, to keep the world from, essentially, the ego was created to keep the world from finding out what was wrong with us. Because when we found ourselves in that world that seemed so overwhelming and so intense, we came to the conclusion, unconsciously, of course, that there must be something wrong with us, and that the entire ego structure is designed to keep the world from seeing that. So you go out into the world and you try and get what you want, but many of us run into difficulty because the life we want to create is not consistent with the fundamental beliefs of your ego. So what happens is our ego keeps finding ways to sabotage our success. Now remember, your ego's function is survival, not happiness. So it'll tend to look at any big change that you want to make in your life, in your business, in your family, whatever, as a potential risk to the status quo. So basically what your ego says to itself is, we've already been surviving without this thing. So why risk it? Why take the risk? And as a result, we create what I call oscillation. We move toward a goal, and then something happens, we get distracted, whatever it is, and we move back away from that goal. Something happens, and then we go back and forth. Anybody recognize that pattern of moving towards something and then coming away and then moving towards and then falling away? That's what we call oscillation. Your ego is kind of resisting you creating a life that you say that you want because it's not consistent with some level of unconscious beliefs about yourself. Okay? Now, by the way, if this is seeming abstract or complex, don't worry. We're going to get into some work in a little bit that'll help you directly experience what I'm talking about. When I work with my clients, I'm not so interested in theory. Like, I'm not interested in the learning from intellect experience with clients. I want them to really move into the experience of peace, of clarity, of their true self, so they can create their lives from there. Now, in the creative structure, we learn to operate from the infinite possibility and freedom of the true self, rather than the fear and the limitation of your ego. So what I want to do with you guys today is to open a possibility of creating a working relationship with this source of peace and clarity and happiness, okay? Hopefully that sounds good to you guys. I'll take it one step further. When we can finally begin to live more and more from this perspective of our true self, both personally and professionally, life becomes a game. And the way I define a game is simple. Basically, a game means you get to make up what winning and losing look like. So I wonder how you would do that if you knew that your happiness was not tied to your accomplishments. See, when we get into this phase that's the phase in my work that I call mastery. So the first phase is waking up, is beginning to see through this mask that we've been wearing called the ego enough times that it no longer becomes the dominant force for us. And once we begin to really see that, when we really begin to know deeply, not just intellectually, that our happiness is not tied to anything going on in the world, Now we can go into the phase I call mastery, which essentially means mastering what I call the invisible forces that shape our lives. So in this, that's the phase where I get into all the cool stuff where we talk about things like energetic intelligence and the triad of change and the formula for effortlessness and a bunch of other stuff that's designed to help people create your game in life with a greater sense of flow and grace than ever before, right? So let's get into the work. So I want to start, and this is a very participatory part of this thing. So if you guys are checking Facebook or something while we're doing this, I'm going to invite you to get present with me for a moment. And we're going to do an exercise together. It shouldn't take literally more than a couple of minutes. And the point of this exercise is to kind of expand you, to give you a sense of something beyond sort of the limited space inside your head. So for this exercise, I just want you to pick something in your general field of vision that you can focus your attention on. I mean, something simple like this, right? And for just a couple of minutes, put your attention on that object. You don't have to look at me. And I'm just going to point out a couple of ridiculously obvious things about this object. The first thing is that that object appears as separate from you, doesn't it? I'm over here, the object is over there. Great, we all agree with that. Second is that this object exists within space. Now that may be really obvious, but how many of you were aware of that before I pointed it out? See, our nervous system is designed to focus on the objects in space, not so much the space around the objects, but we're going to flip that for a moment. So I want you to just look at this object, and as you're looking at it, become aware of the space around it, just maybe a couple of inches to start. And allow that space to expand, or allow your awareness of that space to expand to maybe a couple of feet around the object. And within a short time, you can notice that this object exists within the space of this entire room, or the entire room that you're sitting in, doesn't it? So be aware simultaneously of the object and of the space in the room in which it exists. But we can keep going from there, right? So you can know that that object exists within the space of the entire building that you're in, because the walls don't matter, there's still space. It exists within the space of the entire neighborhood that you're in right now. And we can keep going little by little, expanding our attention. And the mind is amazing this way, because even though you cannot directly be aware of infinite space, somehow you can know that this object exists within the space of the entire universe. So let yourself just know that for a moment. Just be aware of infinite space. That's it. That's it. And you can sort of drop the object and just be aware of the space now for a few more moments. Notice that as you do that, your mind might get a little bit quieter. You might even notice that the collective space that we all share becomes a little more still. And we're going to make another shift now in this infinite space that you're letting your mind be aware of. Notice that you are aware of it. That may seem really obvious, but I'm inviting you to notice the awareness of space itself. Allow awareness to permeate every single molecule of space, or whatever you call it, in the universe. And just notice how it allows your mind to become even more still and more quiet. It doesn't matter if we're sitting right next to each other or 1,000 miles apart. This kind of stuff is beyond time and space. So just notice that space, notice that stillness, and kind of let yourself gently come back into the room. into this present moment. But you can bring some of that space with you, some of that stillness in your mind. And from that space of peace, I want to talk about what I call a true choice. So a true choice is the kind of the antithesis of problem solving. When we make a true choice, it requires that we operate from the creative structure. A true choice is stepping into the experience of what we want to create now. So if you say, whatever a true choice might be, and feel free, if you'd like, to put some of the choices you may have in the chat box. Like, what is a choice that you say, I want to create in my life? I want to increase my business, or I want to change something about my family, or my health, or my well-being, whatever it may be. When we make a true choice, we step into the reality of that choice now, in this moment. We say, I choose X. I choose to double my business by the end of this year, whatever it may be. And you step into that and the experience and the feeling of that now. So we're not waiting for some future circumstance to be fulfilled before we can be happy. We're starting from the place of happiness and peace and clarity, and we're stepping into a desired future now. Now, when we begin to live from this perspective, this idea, this truth, really, that our happiness is not truly tied to any outcome that we create in life, it creates a freedom and an ease that, in my experience, is actually correlated with greater success. So the ego says, I can't relax, because if I relax, I'm not going to be able to get what I want. I've got to keep grinding and grinding and grinding, pushing, working harder and harder. And the true self says, relax. Like, if we can just relax, we see possibilities. I'm not even necessarily making this like law of attraction or all that kind of stuff, which some of you guys might be aware of. All that stuff is fine, but I'm making it even simpler. When we are operating from a place of peace and clarity and freedom, we see possibilities for ourselves that we don't normally see. It's like our perspective opens and something else becomes available that we couldn't see before. And in those possibilities, call it intuitive or higher self or whatever you like, we're getting downloads of something that, if we learn to follow them, all kinds of other cool stuff shows up. And that's certainly been my experience and the experience of many of the clients that I've worked with. So even if your ego tries to argue with this, and it probably will, say, yeah, but what about this? What about that? And you don't know what my life is like, and you don't know what kind of problems I'm wrestling with. All that is true. And you can have everything going on in your life, every challenge or problem that you may be experiencing, and still operate from a place of clarity and peace and freedom. And that's the part that nobody's telling us. So this is my objective, that we learn to create success and happiness with infinitely less stress than we're currently using. That we don't have to try and push the boulder up the hill all the time. I'm just curious, how are you guys doing? Any questions or comments at this point? Linda says yes. Catherine says yes. Thanks. Are you guys, like, is this resonating? Is it making sense? All good, all good. Thank you. So if you have questions, and if you want to be vulnerable and you have questions, how does this relate to my life or my challenges or my particular issues, and you're willing to share that here, and it doesn't have to be super personal, let me know, and let's see if maybe we can create a little space around that for you. right?
Free to light up the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself if you would like to participate.
Yeah, you can just, you know, if you want to ask directly, you certainly can do that. I thought you raised your hand there for a second, Michael. I almost called on you. Melinda,
Hey,
hi.
Dr. Fred. Hi, I'm loving this. I hear people say, you know, I have to make that happen. That seems to me to be a lot of effort to make things happen. And it seems kind of the antithesis of what you're talking about.
Mm.
Allowing or coming from, is that the same concept?
That's the
here?
word that came to my mind when you said make. I thought allowing, you know, like what can we allow to happen? It's just a very different feeling when we get into that place of allowing. Now, let me really, you're going to run into resistance with this kind of thing. It's going to seem like I can't allow, you know, I still got to go out and make sales calls or whatever I do. Yeah, that's true. This is not an argument for like sitting at home, you know, with a bowl of chips and just waiting for life to come to you. This is about partnering with this other part of yourself. That's what I said earlier, right? We want to create a working relationship with your true self in such a way that it just opens up possibilities for you, rather than, you know, you're constantly kind of laser beam focused on what's right in front of you. You know, here's a metaphor. This is something I think about sometimes. If you're, and this has to do with this idea of planning. You know, there are people, maybe some of you guys on this call, that try and plan everything out, like every step of my life. I've got to have it planned and organized. That's fine. I mean, that's one way to go, but I want to give you a metaphor and see how this fits for you. If you're driving at night along a road that doesn't have any streetlights, like I live in Austin, and sometimes when I drive to Houston, there's big stretches of road that are completely dark at night. So all I have are the headlights on my car to tell me what's in front of me. So how far ahead do your headlights will they let you see in front of you? Somebody yell it out. What do you think?
I don't know. 6 feet, 10 feet.
30 feet, Daniela says, yes, whatever it is, right? 6 feet. Let's say somewhere between 6 and 30 feet, okay? So that's the reality. That's how far ahead you can actually plan your life. You can plan just as far as your headlights will show you. So that doesn't mean you can't have goals and all that stuff, but if you hold your goals so tightly that it doesn't allow you to see anything else, you're going to miss all the beautiful scenery along the way, perhaps. So this is an opportunity to, yes, have goals, have visions, whatever, but learn to be more and more in the moment and to be able to be present in this experience. And I have one of my mentors in my life, a man named Steve Chandler, who I dearly love. He's in mid-70s right now, probably, and he's written something like 40 books. And he tells this story about having this hotshot CEO, and he said, you know, I'm interviewing coaches. I'm going to hire someone, and you know, you're my last interview. And he hands him. He said, "This is my 5-year plan. Look at this." And the 5-year plan was like laminated in 4 colors, and you know, I mean, this guy had his life organized down to like when he was going to stop to pee, you know. And Steve, being Steve, flips through this book for a minute. And he hands it back to him. And Steve's very, you know, typical low-key way. He says, "Frankly, this is the most fear-based thing I've ever seen in my life." Because it's like this guy was leaving no room whatsoever for magic to happen, you know, like for the possibility that something that he couldn't plan for might unfold. And so, interestingly enough, guess who the CEO hired? Because everybody else was saying, okay, here's the plan, and we're going to create accountability, and we're going to break it down into steps. And, you know, it's like they were in that same model with him, except that they were probably way less successful at it than he was. So they didn't need someone to do that. Thank you. That's great. The magic is the best part of the journey. I could not agree more. So this is what we want to create. And this is what I'm trying to like offer or invite you guys to, is the possibility of a little less control and a little more magic, a little more possibility. And that is the distinction, the difference between problem solving and creation. Watch this, okay? Just kind of get quiet. There's still that nice peaceful space in the room. I mean, all of our rooms, I should say. So take a moment and ask yourself this question. From a place of relative peace, ask yourself, who would I be if there was no problem to solve? No problem. Not what am I going to have for lunch? Not what am I going to do after this? No problem to solve. Russ says he'd be bored. Russ, if you want to come on camera, I would be delighted to discuss that with you. But no, you don't have to.
I don't have any. Yeah, I'm fine.
So, because by the way, I bet there's some other people that had a similar reaction or a similar thought. So you would be bored if there was no problem to solve.
Absolutely.
Where'd you go? There you are. Okay.
Yeah, I would be totally bored if I had no problems to solve, nothing to work out, nothing for my mind to do in terms of finding a solution, supporting others in discovering their solutions, and just problem solving. You know, half of what we do is really about, and that's what I wrote in the chat, was experiments become experience. And if you really open yourself up and lose track of the ego, that's when the magic happens. That's when you have an opportunity to discover new things that you never realized, without judgment, without expectation, without anything in line. And, you know, I really feel sorry for some individuals that, you know, they map everything out. Like you said, this is the most fear-based program you have. And it's like, allow yourself to stumble and fall and learn something new and discover something else. Talk to new people, talk to people outside your industry, and have conversations like this all the time, because that's when the real magic takes place.
Yeah, thanks. And I don't think we're actually saying that much differently. We may be using different language, because what I really, you know, what I just heard you say is like just to be in that flow, to be in that moment. So not solving problems does not mean not engaging in life. It means that we're looking through a different lens. We're looking through the lens of creation and possibility rather than problems and fixing.
Yeah.
You see? So I don't think you would be bored, but I think when we, you know, if we took the time to get our language clear, I think we'd probably be more in the same place than it sounds like. Okay. Anyone else?
I love creating, so that's
yeah,
my,
exactly.
that's my,
Exactly. I see that. Did anyone else, when you really just ponder that for a moment, who would I be if I had no problems, if there were no problems to solve? Does anybody else notice anything when they go there? Rebecca, hi.
Well, I said I'd be me because I deliberately try to create some space on my own schedule for that time, because it's when you just are at a place of acceptance. That's when you can imagine all the things. So it's like, that's when I can imagine my next adventure, or, create the next plan. But if I'm always focused on, oh, I've got to check this thing off my box, then I miss out on the adventure planning, and that's where the fun happens.
Exactly. Yes. And we notice, because this is a journey, it's not this or that, is we notice incrementally, little by little. Like I think of, like it's really not linear, but if you think of the journey from complete identification with ego to complete awakening to true self, what someone might call enlightenment or something, it's a gradual journey. Which way? I forget which way I was going, which was which. But, the journey from true self towards, from ego towards true self is a gentle step-by-step process. And we just become more free, and more we see what I can let go of, what I don't have to control, where I can leave that space for imagination or just trusting something's going to come to me. So yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Rebecca. Anything else? Any other thoughts or questions?
I got a question.
Who's
So how do you map out people with personalities that are so driven that you imagine that they are self-actualizing, for lack of a better word? You look at like your Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Elon Musk, these type of
Yeah.
personalities.
I know Steve was into Zen. Steve meditated for, I think it was an hour or something a day. So that was Steve's path. One of the things I do with my clients is I have them take a test. Maybe some of you guys are familiar. There's a kind of almost ancient, like a few hundred years old, test called the Enneagram, ENNEAGRAM. It's pretty well known. I mean, there's probably a few hundred books written about it, et cetera. And it gives people what I call like a topographic map of the ego. So here's the really important thing to understand about the ego is that it can only live in the shadows. It can live when we don't see it. That's when it really has the wheel. So when you begin to, and it takes time, like it's not like you point it out one time and the ego just rolls over and surrenders, but over time, we begin, because once we see it for what it is, Dr. Young, once we see it for what it is, we see it for that it's really not true. You guys, you can't, like if we were to cut you open, sorry, that's a disgusting image, but we wouldn't find your ego in there somewhere. It's not an organ. It's not a thing. It is literally just a thought, a repeated story that you've been telling about yourself, about the world, or about other people since you're like 2 years old. And guess what? If we repeat a lie often enough, it starts to look a lot like the truth. So it takes time and it takes a very open mind. This is another answer to your question, Daniela, is that the sort of the prerequisite, like the price of admission to do work like this, is you've got to be able to be honest with yourself and self-aware. You've got to be willing to look and see what's there. And honestly, sometimes it's not very comfortable. And the courage that you bring to this process, this courage that you say, yes, I'm willing to look in some of these scary places. It doesn't mean like you're going to, the truth is, as soon as you look and you see it, even though it may feel uncomfortable for a moment, the inevitable result, which doesn't take all that long, is, oh, that's not even true. So like the worst fears that we have, that like somebody's going to find out that we're really broken, that we're really not worthy, or that, imposter syndrome, that we've been faking it the whole time. Once we begin to see that we really just made that up, there's a lot more space to live. It's like, I used to joke when I was a chiropractor, and the chiropractic work that I did was very untraditional. It was more like transformational work and the kind of nervous system based work. And the joke would be that metaphorically, people would like come in carrying these 2 giant suitcases, like all their life and their trauma and all that stuff. And I would say to these people, welcome, you can put your bags down, metaphorically. And guess what they would all say? I can't hear you, Melinda. If you were speaking to me, well, there you
That's
go.
okay. I'll just hold on to them.
Okay. Well, they wouldn't even say that. They'd say, what bags? like we don't realize that we're carrying all this weight with us. But when you realize that you're carrying it, and this gets into another part of the process, a lot of the work I do in coaching is through the body, meaning I teach people how to, I call it meet your experience exactly as it is in this moment right now. And when we learn to meet our experience in this way, then something magical happens. We meet it. It's like we're saying to this part of ourselves that we've ignored or denied or pushed away, we're saying, I see you. And in that space of awareness that we are, right? The true self is the awareness of our experience. Another name for that space of awareness is love. And so when we allow our experience to be present in this space of love, when we meet it that way, it becomes a door. It just becomes a doorway into something deeper, into who we really are. So this is very different, right? The way I work with people is not based in problem solving. It's based in this idea that you are already whole, but you might not yet see it. And so just simply helping people to see the ways in which we all have lied to ourselves can be powerful medicine, really. Every experience that we have, even the ones that are super uncomfortable, I'm suggesting are the exact medicine you need if you could be present with it in that moment. Catherine has her hand up. She knows how to use Zoom.
Thank you. So I have a question. How do you use this technique, especially with your background in chiropractic treatment, like for someone who is trying to solve the problem of getting rid of pain?
Yeah. Well, I'll be the first to tell you that this approach may not be a match for everyone. So if someone is in crisis, for example, I know you didn't say that, but if someone is in crisis, like they're in, horrible pain, someone's got to deal with that first. And I don't know if it means go to the emergency room or whatever it is. But if someone, like I said before, if they're willing to be honest and self-aware and open to a possibility like this, then the first thing we want to do is change their relationship to the pain. Okay, so suddenly, if you put your hand on I used to say this all the time when I was a chiropractor, if you put your hand on a hot stove, you're going to get a really quick signal that that's a bad idea. Now, but we live in this world that's all about convenience, and you shouldn't have to change anything. So to carry this silly metaphor to the extreme, you come to me, like with your hand, like dragging the stove along with you, and you're saying, my hand hurts. Can you help me? Now, if you take that, if you go to I'll bash on medical doctors for a second. I don't really not like MDs, but they're going to say, oh, yes, you have hand pain. Let me give you some painkillers so that your hand will stop hurting. You see? No one ever says, just take your hand off the stove. But when we change our relationship to the pain, when we see that the pain is not the problem, the pain, and this could be physical pain, it could be emotional pain, it could be the pain of something, like in our business or relationship that isn't the way we think it should be, then we have the opportunity in that moment to say, what is this trying to tell me? So we're not trying to say that we're going to get rid of it. Well, ultimately, nobody likes pain and we'd like it to go away. But by partnering with the pain, by trying to help it, let it direct us in certain ways, you might find that it teaches us something that we might not otherwise see. And then it gets into, beyond that, there's all kinds of cool stuff. When you start getting into stuff like neuroplasticity and things like that, you find that people, for example, with chronic pain that maybe has been with them for years or decades, that there are literally ways to reprogram the brain. Because sometimes, despite everything I just said, sometimes it's just the pain is a loop. It's like the brain just got stuck in a neurological loop that it can't get out of. And so we teach the brain how to create a different loop rather than the one that it's stuck in. Is that more or less answering your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Other questions, thoughts?
Some of what you're saying, I have this app called Waking Up, right? It's a meditation app.
Sam Harris?
Yeah, that's the man right there. That's my
Mhm.
man. And he had one meditation on it was actually a practice where you have to kind of sit in the pain and just examine it. But he also does a lot of stuff where it's, if you have like a mental stress happening. All that aside, I was wondering if meditation is actually a big part of your practice. Do you incorporate that quite a bit?
It not in the direct sense, and I have nothing against meditation.
Okay.
But my interest is in life becoming the meditation. I'm interested in just, excuse me, every moment. When we learn to not be afraid of our experience, like not be afraid of what we might feel in here, then every moment just becomes an opportunity to come into the present. It's like life is constantly trying to pull us into the present moment.
So how do you show people that?
Well, what we did here today is one way, I think.
Right.
Again, it's not intellectual. I mean, everything I'm saying is essentially a concept until we sit down and do it together. So maybe this is the answer to your question, okay? And I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So the chiropractic work that I did for a bunch of years, over 25 years, is what you might call subtle energy work. It's not like twisting and popping kind of stuff. It's moving, it's working with energy and all kinds of very subtle stuff. And so that made me very sensitive to that kind of thing. So you and I are having a conversation, and you may be saying, okay, here's my goals and here's what I want to create. Or we may just be talking. I might say, hey, how's it going? What's going on today? And you could go on and say blah, blah, blah. And then you'll say some phrase. It could be anything, work, my mother, it doesn't matter, some phrase. And you just keep going. Like that wasn't even the point. It was just something you were saying in the process of getting somewhere else. But what I might notice is that when you say that particular thing, that there's a contraction inside of you. Now, you probably didn't even notice it, but in that moment, there was a shift. And if because this is something that I've spent a long time doing, I might notice. And so I'll say, okay, hang on a second, slow down, back up. What was that?
Zero in on the thing.
Right.
You might not be noticing.
Exactly. Now, see, this is not to we're not saying now, okay, let's fix this issue with your mom or whatever.
Mhm.
I'm just going to say, when you said this, I want you to notice what happens inside of you. I told you I like to work with the body because I think the body's a lot less slippery than the mind. So it holds still a little bit better once you learn to pay attention. So I will together, I'm going to sort of guide you into that place where you can meet your experience exactly as it is. We're not trying to fix it or change it in any way. We're just noticing it. And then again, being with your experience in this way, thank you, Melinda, being in this experience in this way is an art, because we've actually gotten really good at denying our experience for most of our life, of not feeling, of pushing it down. So learning to be present with it in this way takes a little practice. But as you do, I think this is answering your question, Daniel, you learn to just be more present in life. You learn how to just be here now. Is that somewhat answered?
Oh, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Leslie, hi.
Okay, so let me kind of reiterate what I think you said. So in other words, say I'm talking to, I don't call him my manager, I call him my coach. I'm talking to my coach and we're talking business, and all of a sudden I say something, a sentence about my ex-husband, and then I go on about,
Right.
that's what
You may go on and on. You may go, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. Or you may keep talking about something else. But in that moment that your ex-husband, whatever it may be, comes into your consciousness, if you're not complete, now this may be challenging, but I'm just going to use your example, okay? If when you think of your ex-husband or whatever it may be for anyone, and you don't have an experience of love, then we're not complete. And that means that there's something in us that we're holding on to. And so that's where we get stuck, right? And we think, okay, well, I'll be complete when such and such changes, when this person, does whatever they're supposed to do. And believe me, I get it. I'm not saying this is easy. But what's happening, see, I believe that life is infinitely generous, infinitely benevolent, in that it's going to give us exactly what essentially that contraction means. When we feel that, is life is showing us in this moment where we are not yet free, or we're at least not aware of the freedom that's already present. So
I'm aware. I'm aware.
Right.
I just
Okay.
don't know how to get rid of it.
Well, and so my answer in the short conversation here is the answer. It's not to get rid of it. It's to bring that part of you home. When we can see it and be with it completely, that part becomes, it's like a wave returning to the ocean. Okay. If you're the ocean, and I mean an infinite ocean, this ocean of peace and freedom, a wave is like this part of you that hasn't yet realized that it's the ocean. And so we know three things for sure about that wave. We know where it came from. We know what it must be made of, because there is only the ocean in this metaphor. So the wave must be made of whatever the ocean is made of. And we know that the wave must return to the ocean. So you don't have to you can't get rid of the wave because the wave is part of you. But you can allow the wave back. And then it stops becoming this source of pain and tension and contraction. And then it's just the work. Then it's just learning how to be with that experience, which is what I was talking about before. Is that helpful?
Yeah. I mean,
It's
I
not gonna-
notice,
what's that?
I notice it every time it happens.
Well, I got to tell you, noticing it is definitely, a step in the right direction. It really is. And, we say this uses problem solving language, but an old mentor of mine used to say a problem well defined is already half solved. So convert that into creative structure, right? And anything in life that we can perceive effectively, that we can really see, we're already on the way to resolving it.
Just
thank
don't
you,
know
Lisa.
how to resolve it.
Okay. So
That's
I'm gonna,
right.
I
For
was gonna,
everybody, I'm sure I'm talking for everybody here,
well,
otherwise
everybody's got it somewhere. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I was going to wait a few minutes before I made this, but I'll make an offer now. This is actually, I don't see anyone here that I've done like a one-on-one with, those things we like to do in NIA. The way I often do one-on-ones is I just say, hey, if you'd like, we can do it like an actual coaching session. And the reason for that is because that way you're going to learn what I do. I'm going to learn all about you in the process anyway. And hopefully you get some value out of the process. So, Leslie or anyone that would like to explore this a little bit further, reach out to me. In fact, what I was going to do, I'm going to put, I'm going to put my LinkedIn, where is it? I had it saved, I thought. I guess I don't. Let me try again. I'm going to put my LinkedIn information in the chat. And as soon as I can find it here, give me 1 second. Of course, I'm making a mess of everything now. Well, if I'm not able to get it because my computer's being a little uncooperative at the moment.
I'll dig it up for you, Mona.
You got it? All right, awesome. I thought I had it, but I don't see it now. Anyway, yeah, if you can put it in, or I'm going to try one more time because I'm stubborn. And that's an easy way to contact me. There it is. Boom. Feel free to, and there it is again. Then just hit me up there, or, I'll make it even easier. Here's my phone number. Okay. Call me. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm more than happy to set up some time to talk, and maybe that will be enough to help you, Leslie or anyone, begin to see how to do this a little bit more on your own. Because it's not difficult, but we have a lot of conditioning that makes it more challenging at first to really do this, because we've been practicing something else for 30, 40, 50 years. So we're really good at not being with our experience. And now we're going to learn a different skill, basically. Thank you, Leslie. Anybody else have questions or anything? Prem has a comment. While I'm in the comments, I'll look at it real quick. Pain is a valuable part of change in our lives if we learn to get comfortable with it. What we can use to bring, there's a thing right in front. No, I lost it. Oops, sorry. What we can use to bring about change in our life. Oh, what can we use to bring about change in our lives? I sense that was more of a rhetorical question than an actual one. But if you have more to say about that, I'd love to hear it. But yes, I could not agree more. Pain is a great teacher, but for that matter, so is pleasure. Any experience that we're willing to be present with will take us further into the truth of who we are. The key is not, this gets again a little more into subtleties, but it's called being identified with the experience. So the ego tries to identify with something. When we're angry about our ex-husband or whatever it is, we identify with the experience. We say, I am angry, or I am whatever. And we become that experience. It's reinforcing the ego and the separateness of the ego and all that stuff. And so we try and become disidentified from it. We begin to see that we are, like, our true self is the space in which our experience occurs. This is who we really are. We are the field of consciousness or awareness or love in which our experience arises. In other words, we are not the movie, we are the screen in which the movie takes place. But we've been conditioned to think that we're the movie. That may seem very abstract to some of you. And I can tell you that when you really begin to sit with what I'm sharing and do some of this work, it becomes ridiculously obvious. We cannot be anything that, like, all the stories we tell about ourselves are impermanent. They are transient. They come in and out. So how could that be who we are? We're the one thing in our life that has always been present, which is the awareness of what's happening. It's been with you since the moment you're born.
Right. So, Dr. Blum.
This is Prem. Yes. Hey.
Yeah, just to bring some clarity to the question as well. We change when things are uncomfortable, when we feel uncomfortable, right? So if we get comfortable with pain, then what can we use to bring about change? I'm thinking that we don't change when we're comfortable, right?
Okay.
We change when we're uncomfortable.
Yeah. And Leslie says pain is a motivator. It is a motivator, but I would challenge that premise, Prem, that that pain is the only motivator for change. It can certainly be a motivator for change, but I would suggest that if we have ourselves set up that the only way I can change is through pain, then we're setting ourselves up for a lot of pain, you know? And I don't think, I'm a big believer in, I actually have a formula that I created called the technology or the formula for effortlessness. Anybody like to hear the formula for effortlessness? Okay, I'll give it to you, and we could spend, you know, a whole other hour breaking this down. But I'll give you the quick. We got what, 10 minutes left, Daniel? So I'll give you the quick version now. The formula for effortlessness is energy plus alignment plus timing. That's it. Some of you guys are going, yeah, great, thanks. But really look. If we can really, and I'll give you a quick part of that. So energy is the fuel. Nothing in life happens without energy. I can't lift this cup up without energy. I can't change my health without energy. I can't, if I want to change a relationship or my business, it all requires different types of energy. And I identify 5 different types of energy, which I call life force, emotion, lower mind, upper mind, and soul. That's a lot to break down, but just that's the 5 types of energy. Okay, so we need an energy source, which, well, the source is infinite, so we can tap into it anytime we want, but we first have to do that. Then alignment means we need to create whatever structures in our life in such a way that that energy can flow through them. So if we have, like, think of an old-fashioned stagecoach with like 6 horses, right? And if you have those horses hitched up like this at a 90-degree angle, how far are you going to go? Not very far, right? So what's the problem? It's not a lack of energy, right? We have, I mean, literally horsepower. So it's not the lack of energy, it's the lack of alignment. It's the way we're trying to use that energy through a system that isn't properly set up for it. So examples of alignment, one of my favorites is integrity. Integrity is the alignment between your words and your actions. You see? Integrity, alignment might be between members of your team. Are you guys all clear about the objectives? Alignment might be between your head and your heart. Your head wants one thing, your heart wants another. So there's lots of different types of alignment. So that's the second part of the formula. The third part of the formula is timing. So timing is interesting because timing, there's a little bit of timing that we can control. We can control what we do with our time. how we use our time, are we on time for our meetings, etc. But there's a vast other aspect of timing that we cannot control. We can't control the weather. I was going to have a picnic, but it's raining today, you see, stuff like that. So when we begin to see, like, we learn how to align with the timing of life, we don't resist it, we align with it. We find out, okay, a recession's coming. How do I pivot to align with the recession rather than going, oh my God, life is terrible, you see? So energy, alignment, and timing, those three components, those three elements, if we master them, we create just unbelievable magic in our lives. So I hope that answered the question about pain somewhere in there. I specialize in long answers to short questions. Damien left alone. I've done martial arts for 10 years. Good for you. I believe you mentioned doing that as well. Yes, sir. I never imagined how much of it is just me having to face myself and deal with things I didn't even know were there, nor how those limiting mindsets affect my life, relationships, success, etc. That said, I'm still working on dealing with this kind of work, which you shared today. Thank you. Okay. I don't think there's a question in there, but if there is, feel free to shout it out. Thanks, you guys. This has been fun. Any other questions? I know we probably have to wrap up in a few minutes. But if there's anything else, I'll stay on here all day with you guys. Not really. I have a 5 o'clock, but we've got
Dr. Fred, I think this was a lot of fun, a lot to mull over. You know, you're doing some real deep dives with folks, I could tell. I had a lot of fun, and I'm sure everybody else did, because you definitely had my gears turning.
Yeah.
And you had my attention without a PowerPoint, so this was great. Everyone, any last chance, if you have any questions or comments for Dr. Fred? I see some things rolling through the chat, a lot of thank yous.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well,
I'm
once
gonna
again, I'm
say
going to go ahead and drop your LinkedIn in the chat one last time. If anybody wants to
Beautiful.
get in touch with Dr. Fred, go ahead and hit him up.
Yeah, that's an easy way to get a hold of me, and you know, connect with me on LinkedIn while you're there. I'd love to see you guys there. That's where I do all my like social media, really. And if if anybody would like to, set up a one-to-one and take this into the, more personal example for yourself, that would be my pleasure. I really love doing this with people. I'm really just so blessed that this is like how I get to spend my day. So I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day, whatever it took to get you here. I appreciate it. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, you guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fred, thank you so much once again. And I
Thank
encourage
you.
all of you
It's
to
great.
join us on the 1st, 3rd, and 4th Wednesday of every month for our Network with the Nation speaker series and our focus forum. Every Wednesday, 3 o'clock Central Time. Join us. We love having you. And once again, everyone, a warm thank you to Dr. Fred.
Thanks, everyone.
We will be
Thank
seeing
you.
you all on the next one. And
Yeah.
our next is going to be our Network with the Nation. So be sure to join that. You guys can make one-to-one connections, connect with people with our speed networking. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Looking forward to seeing everyone. Have a great one. Thanks again, Dr. Fred.
Bye, everybody. My pleasure.